And so for the people that aren't here today, okay, oops. Oh, there you go.
All righty. Okay. Michelle.
Okay. So who we are? We're a nonprofit organization across Alberta, and we're also across disability.
And there we are. There's myself and Michelle. And the reason we actually have to show our pictures is because we've had presentations where people don't realize that we are people that live with disability. So we think that's pretty important to point out. And if you'd met us in real life, it'd be pretty obvious. Yeah, and what we do disability awareness presentations like this one from, Michelle kind of implied, from kindergarten all the way to university and businesses and organizations. Anyone who's willing to listen, we're willing to talk to. And we tailor those presentations for the audience.
Yes. And supported referral. So we have a lady in our office that does H forms, H appeal forms, and CPP forms, and also simple taxes during tax season as our services, and all these services are free for our clients.
Yeah, just need to book an appointment now.
Yes.
In
yes.
COVID times.
Yeah. And she does Zoom calls as well now, but by appointment only.
And then the last one is accessibility assessments. We have a lovely lady in the office. Her name is Sam Mason, and she will come out to organizations and assess the accessibility, not only of your physical location, but as far as policies and procedures and anything that sort of could have an effect on people with disabilities, sort of playing on the same level as everyone else. So
yeah,
and I don't think they charge for that, or if it is, it's a very nominal fee.
Yeah, and she'll also double check your website for you as well.
So we like to start with a quote from Nelson Mandela, and we've changed the quote just to be from our perspective, a first person perspective. And it states, "We do not need the patronage of the non-disabled. It is not for us to adapt to the dominant and dominating world of the so-called non-disabled. It is for them to adapt their understanding of a common humanity, to learn of the richness of how human life is diverse, to recognize the presence of disability in our human midst as an enrichment of our diversity." Thank you, Nelson Mandela.
Okay, so ableism. Ableism is the belief that people with disabilities have less worth than people without disabilities. For instance, some people may hold the false belief that people with disabilities matter less than non-disabled people because they think
that people with disabilities cannot contribute to society. Where here, Michelle and I are contributing.
People with disabilities need help from non-disabled people who are more important, which is so not true. We all need help from each other. For instance, with my husband and I, he does the cooking. He helps with that. And I make sure the bills get paid. So we all work together. We all need help at some point in our lives.
Absolutely. And certain movements, senses, or thought processes are needed for everyday activities, such as working or marriage or being employed. Where that is not true, we are very adaptable.
Yeah, very, very creative too. cannot care for homes and families, which is so not true. Myself, again, I've been caring for my home and my family for over 20 years now. And I know many, many people who take care of their homes and families. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So we just want to do a little exercise with you. We're not keeping track. This is out for your own personal growth. And we're calling it the privilege backpack. And so we're going to go through a list of questions. And if we'll tell you if you answer yes or no, you kind of put a little check mark in your backpack. I hope that makes sense.
Okay.
So,
The
yeah.
first question.
So these, if you answer no.
Yes. These ones are
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, sorry. If you answer yes to these questions, you put a little check mark in your privileged backpack. That means you have privilege.
Yeah.
All right.
So, number 1, can you reach the top of your fridge? That's a huge no. Huge.
Our fridges are very dusty.
Yeah.
Number 2, are you in charge of planning your day, or do you rely on someone else to help you with that?
Number 3, can you cross the street safely? And in my case, it depends a lot on the weather. Lately, no.
Number 4, do you understand every word a retail clerk says to you?
Number 5, if the elevator is out of order, can you take the stairs? Another big no.
Just a daydream in my world. Number 6, when it snows, are you able to get to work if the sidewalks are not clear? Which can be a struggle for many people.
Yes. And number 7, are you able to have a verbal conversation on the phone?
Yeah, so any of those that you added or said yes to, they go in your backpack, and we have 3 more questions. Whereas if you answer no to these questions, you put a check mark in the backpack.
Go ahead.
Okay, number 8, have you ever been asked if your spouse has a disability?
Number 9, have you ever been asked if you were born this way?
And number 10, have you ever been asked just to behave or move normally? And so just so you know that Michelle and I score a 4 or 5 on this quiz. It's usually has something to do with snow that changes our scores. But so we have privilege, you know. There are people with disabilities that have a lot less privilege than we do. And we certainly try to use our privilege to advance the rights of people with disabilities. So we like to go over the World Health Organization's definition of disability. Up until 2019, we used to say that Canada didn't even have a definition of disability. Whereas in 2019, the Accessible Canada Act was passed. So now we do have kind of a federal definition, but we like the World Health Organization's better. It's more detailed. So I'm going to read it through and just give you an example from my perspective. So disabilities is an umbrella term covering impairments, activity limitations, and participation restrictions. So an impairment is a problem in body function or structure. So for myself, just to keep it really simple, my legs don't work. An activity limitation is difficulty encountered by an individual executing a task or an action. So that would be myself encountering a set of stairs. Definitely, produces an activity limitation. While a participation restriction is a problem experienced by an individual in involvement in life situations. So for me, it would be whatever's at the top of those stairs. It could be a job interview, could be a family reunion. It could be a party with college friends. Yeah. And that can be applied to anyone. So including, when we say problem in body function or structure, that includes the brain. So it includes people with brain injuries, includes everyone. So it's
Yeah.
just a little formula that you can use. Oops.
Okay.
Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
Michelle. I will try to go back here.
Okay. So the second part of the definition is disability is not just a health problem. It's a complex phenomena reflecting the interaction between the features of the person's body and features of the society in which he or she lives. Overcoming the difficulties faced by people with disabilities requires intervention to remove environmental and social barriers. So this part of the definition is saying it's not the only the person with the disability, it's the environment in which he or she lives or works or socializes that has the issue as well.
And so just to cover the scope, disability covers many conditions, some visible and some not visible. A disability may have been present from birth, caused by an accident, or developed over time. There are physical, mental, and learning disabilities, mental disorders, hearing or vision disabilities, epilepsy, drug and alcohol dependencies, environmental sensitivities, and other conditions. So as you can see, the scope of disability is actually quite large.
Huge. So here's some stats from 2007, and yes, these are the most recent stats that we can find right now. They take a while to be published, to come out. So a survey in 2017 indicates that 22% of Canadians identify as having a disability. So that's 1 in 5 people, 22% of Canadian population aged 15 years and over. I guess 15 years and younger don't really count. And about 6.2 million individuals have one or more disabilities, according to the 2017 Canadian Survey on Disability. And what these stats don't include is the people that don't identify with having a disability, and there are many. And it doesn't include the people that are affected by the person who has the disability, such as parents, grandparents, coworkers, friends, etc. So those aren't included. So if they were, the numbers would be higher, a lot higher.
And so just to go over a couple of the laws that sort of influence disability in Canada, is in March of 2010, Canada ratified the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. And when you ratify a convention with the UN, you are saying to the world, we're on board. We're doing this. It is how we are. Which was bizarre to me because there was nothing being done to improve the rights of people with disabilities when this was ratified. So I always kind of thought that was odd. I just sort of stumbled across it. It wasn't a big fanfare that, hey, we did this. And then unfortunately, in April of 2019, we had a special rapporteur come to Canada to review how we're doing in implementing the convention, and we got a failing grade. We were told that Canada significantly lags behind other developed countries, that we still look at disability as some sort of charitable thing as opposed to a rights-based, phenomenon. So yeah, we have more work to do. And then the last one, so this kind of almost happened at the same time, Canada passed the Accessible Canada Act in 2019. The problem with some of our federal acts is very similar to the Employment Equity Act, and it really only has power over federally mandated businesses and, federal employees, right? So it affects banks and airports, bus terminals, things that federal sort of businesses, but it doesn't affect the corner store. It doesn't even affect our provincial governments. It is now up to, when federal law is passed, it is now up to our provincial governments to follow suit. Ontario has had disability legislation for over 20 years. Manitoba has it, and I think it's Nova Scotia. I'm not not positive, but one of the Maritimes does have disability laws. And so Alberta is behind in this regard.
So just something for everyone to think about. Disability does not discriminate. Disability exists in every demographic. So people with disabilities are old, young, white, black, two-spirit, straight, Catholic, Muslim. It doesn't matter. So if we improve the lives of people with disabilities, we then may improve the lives in every demographic. It's everywhere. It's not segregated.
We think it'd be worth a shot to spend a little bit of time improving the lives of people with disabilities to see if maybe we could improve the lives of many different demographics. So far, nobody's sort of taken us up on the idea, but we'll keep saying it. So important thing to talk about with people about people with disabilities is our activities of daily living. They must be supported in order for us to move on beyond that and get educated and employed and married and have kids. All of those things are possible if our activities of daily living are supported. And this is sort of where we break down in Alberta, that those services are hidden under layers of bureaucracy, and not everybody gets access to them. Michelle and I are very, 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 very lucky that we live in a housing co-op in Edmonton that has a home care company attached to it. And so because they're here, we actually get a little bit of help in our homes where we would get nothing in any other area. It's just because we found this funny little pocket of service, and I've been here for 18 years. So I keep trying to bring my friends to come live here. You can get a little bit of help with housekeeping. Cause for me, when I was living independently, on my own completely, it's like washing floors and changing the sheets on beds. I could do all the regular everyday stuff, but it was those bigger tasks that then caused me depression, because I'm kind of picky and I don't like to live with dirt on my floors. And so, it was just a great honor to have found this place and be able to live here. And I've done most of my good work since I've lived in an environment where I'm supported.
Okay, spoon theory. The premise of spoon theory is that everyone wakes up with 10 spoons, sometimes more, sometimes less. And the spoons are our energy for the day. So let's say I wake up with 10 spoons. By the time I get up, make the bed, and everyone keep in mind I have a king size bed. So it's a lot of walking around the bed and tugging and all that kind of stuff. So by the time I do that, wash up, do my hair, and get my makeup and stuff ready to go, I'm down 2 spoons. Then I had to spend time waiting for my ride, and then I had to transfer from my scooter to the seat, and then back again once I'm at my destination. So I'm down 1 more spoon. I have 7 spoons left. I worked the day, so I've used about five spoons at work. When I get home, I have 2 spoons left. That's just enough energy to wash up and eat supper. Quite often, I don't have enough energy to call family or friends or log into a Zoom meeting. And quite often, people with disabilities have to give something up earlier in the day to have enough energy for something later in the day. For a real simple example, if I gave up making my bed, which isn't a big hardship whatsoever, but if I gave up making my bed in the morning, I might have time to call my mom in the evening and see how she's doing.
Okay. So just some tips on accepting disability, because the odds are is that we're all going to experience disability at one time or another. I actually read a stat here a couple of years ago that said if you make it to the age of 77 years old, you will have spent 11 of those years with a disability. So it's important for all of us And so the first one being, give yourself time to mourn and acknowledge your feelings. So even for Michelle and I, we were born with our disabilities. And it wasn't until like I was in my 30s that I finally got some help from a psychologist who said to me, it's okay. Like, it's okay to grieve for something that you never even had. You know, it's okay to grieve that. And hopefully, by allowing yourself a little bit of time to mourn, it then allows you to move forward. You know, you give credence to those feelings and then you move on. Yeah. So we all can experience that.
Yeah. And the second one is focus on what you can do and not on the things you can't. And I mean, that goes for everyone as well. And when I was younger, yeah, my focus was on what I can't do because I had two sisters that did all these kinds of things and I couldn't do them. But as I got older, I figured out, yeah, okay, I can do this, but look at what I am doing. And so I learned to focus on what I can do, not what I can't. Sometimes it's still hard, but you know, I still try and focus on what I can do or what I can do differently now than what I used to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the next one is ask for and accept help and support. Now, for some of you, this might seem, well, of course, but believe me, those of us that grew up with our disabilities, we are fiercely independent and we don't like asking anybody for anything. But what you realize over time, because Michelle and I are aging now, is that, you know, sometimes like I used to get really annoyed when I was in my 20s because there'd be like some guy that would like trip over three other people to rush to open the door for me when I'm perfectly capable of opening a door. But I've learned over time that, you know what, it's a good deed. I'm doing a good deed by allowing people to help me. It makes them feel good and everybody walks away unscathed, so now when I come to a door and I can see somebody's itching to come open it, I'll just stop and let them and say thank you, because I don't need to prove to a stranger what I can or can't do. And so I have a lot of friends with disabilities, and this is a big deal. Like I've had to convince some of my friends, just say yes, let them do something for you. It's going to make them feel good. And
Yeah.
so isn't that a good deed in a way to make, in your own way, you're making people feel good.
And plus, if you let someone help you, you're saving a spoon.
It's so true.
So the next one, which Roxanne kind of covered, but accepting help doesn't make you weak. In my opinion, it makes you stronger because you're allowing someone else to feel good about themselves. So,
And you're saving a spoon.
yes.
So the next one is find ways to give back to those who help you. And so we absolutely do not mean monetarily. We mean that being aware that people are making an extra effort is worth acknowledging in some way or another. So I have a really good friend who often will come and help me with things, but she has severe social anxiety. So whenever she has to go somewhere to an appointment or even to an event that she really wants to go to, but she knows she's going to like freak out when she gets there, I go with her because I'm not shy. I'm not afraid. I will go, and so we trade, right? She helps me with the physical things that I can't do, and yet I help her with some of the social things that she can't do. So it's just looking at ways that you can sort of exchange. And part of that is just being grateful and acknowledge that somebody has went out of their way to help you.
And the last one, it's kind of a repeat, but not really. Don't compare yourself to others or to your past self. And like there again, I used to compare myself to my sisters. And like I said earlier, I learned not to because I learned on what I can do and what I can do different from my sisters. But as I got older, I had a hard time because especially now, because I'm comparing myself now to my past self. Because like Roxanne said, we're aging And the stuff that I could do as a young person, I was quite active. I did all kinds of stuff. I can't do anymore. But I look at it a different way. But I'm doing other things that I never thought as a young person I could do, such as these presentations. There's no way when I was young I could do this. So it's a trade-off kind of thing.
Yeah.
So this is one of my favorite cartoons. The little girl that is sitting there using the wheelchair, and two other little girls come up and ask her, "Do we call you handicapped or disabled?" And she goes, "Call me Charlotte." And to me, that says everything. That's her name, Charlotte. So you call her Charlotte. Just kind of speaks for itself there.
And so here's a few just general kind of tips as far as disability goes that we find we get asked or people are curious about. So the first one, the big one is it okay to offer help? So we put one qualifier on that. The person should appear to be struggling. If you randomly went about the community offering people with disabilities help, that might not go over well. But if they appear to be struggling, of course, like Michelle and I believe, absolutely, that is, and we are grateful to live in a place like Canada, because I was just at a Borden Park. You guys aren't from Edmonton, I don't think, but anyways, we was at a ice festival and got stuck, and I don't know how many people offered to to get me out of there. So I am grateful for that. But if you offer someone help and they say no, you need to move on. And that's what I did, because I didn't need help. I'm an expert wheelchair user. It's just a very slow, painful process. But I was able to get myself out. So it's important to respect the person. If they say no, really you should move on. But we've had these animated discussions in our presentations before where I had a gentleman say, but what if I found this guy and he's in a snowbank and he's struggling? And I'm like, well, did you offer him help? And he said, well, yeah. Well, what did he say? He said, no. Well, then move on. To me, people with disabilities get to be as stupid and foolhardy as any other Canadian. But a conscious citizen is not going to leave somebody in a snowbank if they think they're in jeopardy. So we have been saying to call 911, but just recently in a presentation we did, somebody made the suggestion that instead you call 211. I have not had enough ability to figure out if that would be the best way. Because if they're in a snowbank shivering, I think it's kind of an emergent thing. But anyways, it's okay to offer help, but please move on if you're told no. Those are the general rules.
The second one is kind of demonstrated by the cartoon, person first language. Now that's the preference here, is you put the disability for or second, the person first. So instead of saying, we say people with disabilities as opposed to disabled people, and that's the preference here. But it all boils down to personal preference. Some people in the disability community don't like first person language. And Roxanne, you actually have an example of this.
Yeah, specifically in the autism community, they prefer to be identified as an autistic person because they feel that autism plays such a great role in their life, that it is a part of their identity. So that's why we say it's really personal preference. There's other people that find all kinds of different words to describe themselves. And that's great. Like, you go with whatever they tell you to.
Yeah.
And that's the most respectful.
But ideally, you want to call the person by their name.
The next one is power of language, and this is a little more subtle. And so the first example is, for years, I would say I'm in a wheelchair until I started doing this work. And I realized just in all the reading and whatever I was doing that when I say I'm in a wheelchair, that kind of sounds passive. It kind of sounds like the wheelchair might have some power in this situation, right? But it does not. I am in charge. So I use a wheelchair. That's what I say now. And so it's subtle, but it's empowering, to the person. And so these are all just suggestions. You don't have to remember this stuff, but we hope that by saying it and teaching it, that eventually, it will change. But the general rule we use around power of language is do not use words or phrases that imply how somebody feels. Right. So people will say confined to a wheelchair. That's the one that just blows my mind, because this wheelchair was the best thing that ever happened to me. It was the most freeing thing that happened in my life. And then people say confined to a wheelchair. I'm like, oh my God, you should have seen me when I was full leg braces and crutches and dragging my body around, so it's really anything that implies how somebody feels, just like suffers from. Right. That's very, very common. You hear that a lot. They suffer from MS. Well, I'm sure they have days that they suffer, but I bet you there's a lot of days where they don't. And so we don't want to make that assumption. Again, if the person says they're suffering, then they're suffering. Right. But Michelle and I would never use a word like suffering. But there's other words that we use, like afflicted with blindness, when somebody's just blind, profoundly deaf. That's a medical term. People are just deaf. So it's really about trying not to put these descriptors that imply feeling around a disability is really important to think about.
And I just want to add one more point to, especially the first three, is you change the language, you change the perception, right? So we're perceived differently if we use better language or more appropriate language. So the last one here is don't make assumptions. And I know we're all human and we all do make assumptions, but around disabilities, just try and check yourself. One of the most common assumptions or questions that people ask about me is when they find out that I am married, they automatically ask, is he disabled too? And I'm like, no, am I doing something wrong? Oh my Lord. But there is no written rules saying that people with disabilities have to marry or hang out with other people with disabilities. Not at all. There's nothing that I've heard of anyway. For example, I was doing a presentation similar to this one to an elementary school, and I got there early. So we went in the staff room, the teacher and I, to have coffee. And she was asking me all kinds of questions, getting to know me. And she did ask me, are you married? And I said, yes. And without skipping a beat, she asked me, is your husband disabled too? And I'm like, no. And she looked at me. She was actually reaching up and she looked behind at me and said, I'm shocked. And I said, I'm shocked you're shocked, because she was shocked that someone without a disability was with someone with a disability. But I know we were talking about don't make assumptions, but there's one assumption we would like you guys to make. Roxanne's going to explain it.
Yeah, it's a great way to start by assuming we are all capable, unless we tell you or prove to you differently. Don't assume you know what we can or can't do, because I can go downstairs using a wheelchair. I mean, I don't know how many people know that that's a possibility, but you don't make us, I drive my own vehicle. There's all these things that people assume, when they see me, that aren't correct. So just assume everybody is capable and allow them to tell you if they're not, and if they need an accommodation or an adjustment to something. And that's, to me, they have dignity that way, is you're allowing them to state what their needs are. Yeah, assume we are all capable.
Awesome.
Okay. So this is a bit of a, I wouldn't say controversial slide, but we are kind of poking the bear here a bit, because we, especially here in Canada, we don't feel like we've had a voice for many, 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 many years. And so some of the phrases and terms that are being used around in our society, nobody's asked us about, and we have opinions. And I will say that we have polled our peers. So this isn't just Michelle and I. We have done extensive, hey, what do you think of this kind of, and the message has been resounding towards us. So that's why we want to talk about these things. And so the first one being handicapped, still very much used in our society. No judgment, but it's a word that we would like to see slowly disappear because it implies begging. The story goes, and you can look on the internet and find all kinds of conflicting, stories and theories, but the story that kind of got me and that really made sense, this is why I don't like this word. But the story is that a medieval king sent his people, well, probably men, out to war, and they came back wounded with disabilities. And so at the time, it was illegal to beg on the streets. So in his great wisdom and generosity, he decreed that war veterans could beg on the streets, cap in hand. And we don't see disability as a charitable thing and something that we should have. We don't agree that we should have to beg for our most basic needs to be met. And so we are just concerned that that is not the right word to be using. And people with disabilities is the phrase that is protected by law under most nations. So yeah, we would love to see that slowly disappear, but we also are aware that it's still very much used. We think the golfers should just have it.
And the second phrase here is special needs. The phrase came about as an attempt to be less negative, labeling disabled children's educational needs rather than their condition. And, I grew up in this Catholic system, our school system, and I was a special needs child. And growing up with that term or that label on me excluded me a lot more than necessary. I hated that term anyway. I thought my needs aren't special, they're just needs. And I got excluded in the way that other kids would say, oh, you're one of those kids, you have to go over there and do your homework. It wasn't dignified for me. I had my no dignity when I was labeled special needs. And why not call children with disabilities exactly that, children with disabilities or students with disabilities, because then they can grow up with dignity into adults with disability or people with disabilities, which is the legal term. And
right. We
ahead.
Just don't see how you can grow up with that label. Special needs sounds like a term used in childhood, but our needs don't stop when we're children. They continue on, and they're protected by laws around people with disabilities, not special needs. And I just want to make one point about, we can change the name all we want. It never takes away the stigma. So we have to do a lot better than just changing the name of something to make it better. What we needed to do is provide kids with disabilities appropriate integration and access into our schools, not change the name of their needs. Like, we need to dig a lot deeper to and we find that, in a lot of the work I've done, we will spend 20 minutes to a half an hour talking about what label to use. And it annoys me to no end. Mm-hmm. I don't care what you want to call it. We need to get to the meat of it and work to provide us actual access. Yeah. So anyways, that's just a little rant. And okay. I do the next one. Yeah. So inspirational porn. And we put a YouTube link there, but if you search in YouTube, TED Talks, on disability or inspirational porn, this lovely lady by the name of Stella will come up, and she does a great job of explaining it. But Michelle has had a very similar thing happen to her right here, so she'll give you her example. But I just want to say that inspirational porn is sort of I'm sorry, I don't have the words. It's just giving us awards or accolades just for breathing, right? Like we want to, we don't mind getting awards or, you know, being heralded when we've worked really hard for something, but not just because we exist.
Yeah, exactly. Well, in high school, I was in grade 12, and they did set a day aside for awards for the students that have earned or these awards. So we all get the afternoon off, no classes, which was great. So, and I really didn't want to go in the first place, but I went and I sat there, and then um, I was awarded what award called Caritas Christi Award, and in the Catholic school, that was giving of yourself to your fellow students and community, blah blah blah. And when I first got this award, I was flattered and honored, and all that kind of stuff. But then I got thinking soon after I got it, I thought, why in the heck did I get this? I mean, I went to school, I did my work, I was part of the yearbook club, but that's it. I never did any extra because energy wise I couldn't do it. And so I often wondered why I got this award. It was always in the back of my mind. And years later, I was talking to my mom about this, and I asked her, I said, Mom, did I actually earn that award, or did they just give it to me because? And the way that she didn't answer me told me the whole story. And I felt so embarrassed and ashamed and hurt. And that award came off my wall, and it came off my resume. I don't even know what it is, where it is. But I want to earn awards or recognition or whatever, but I want to earn it for doing something neat or great or whatever. I just don't want to be given stuff.
Yeah, it's a hard, yeah, it's not an easy subject because we appreciate that our lives are more difficult in many ways. But we're just regular people. We grow up in regular families and we want to earn our way just like everyone else. We don't want to just be given awards because we exist. Yeah, and so it's something to really think about.
Yeah, I
And so
didn't. Oh, go ahead.
you do the next one. Yes, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Okay. Disability versus unhealthy. So just because a person has a disability doesn't mean that they are unhealthy. So those two words don't necessarily go together. Sometimes, yes, they can, but not always. In my case, I'm actually quite healthy. I'm finding out more and more as my sisters and I get older. My sisters are coming out with all kinds of health problems, immune deficiencies, all kinds of things. And I'm thinking, haha, I'm the healthiest out of all three of us. Because when I was a kid, some people did look at me as unhealthy, but I was never unhealthy. So those two words don't necessarily go together. They can, but not necessarily.
And then the last one is medical diagnosis versus functional description. So you may have noticed that Michelle and I have not given you any kind of medical diagnosis since we've been here, but we have given you a functional description. We've shown us your pictures or our pictures, and you see that I use a wheelchair, Michelle uses a scooter and a cane. You need to know that. But what you don't need to know is my medical diagnosis. It is absolutely irrelevant in everyday life. What you do need to know is what I can or can't do functionally. So, if you're inviting me over for dinner and I'm blind, you might want to know that, right? Because you could make sure that you don't have stuff laying on the floor that people, that somebody who's blind could trip over, so functionally, we want to look at things. And I've even made this suggestion in the healthcare system, right? Because we often get separated even in the healthcare system, of course, by medical diagnosis, but all the people that use wheelchairs have all of the same issues. And so we could set up a clinic for people who use wheelchairs and it would be highly effective as opposed to trying to go to a family doctor who has no other patient that uses a wheelchair. They don't know how to prevent a pressure sore. They don't, there's lots of things that get missed because we don't look at things from a more functional perspective. So just our opinions on some things.
So our next slide is dignity. And I'm just going to read out one of the definitions here. Dignity is the right for a person to be valued and respected for their own sake, not because they're male, female, black, whatever. It's because you're a human being. You deserve to be respected and valued.
Absolutely. And we've just got a couple of examples that we feel like brings the point home. And so the first two, intention and impact. My example is, so when I'm out in the community, almost guaranteed somebody will say to me, hey, you should put a motor on that thing, because I use a manual wheelchair. And I know that their intention is to start a conversation, to be friendly, to acknowledge that I'm out in the world. And so I know that their intention is not bad, right? But the impact on me almost every time is I think, don't I look able enough to use this thing? I mean, I got this tiny little sports wheelchair that I can go up and down. I can do all kinds of stuff in that thing. And so it kind of hits me like, well, don't I look like I know what I'm doing? Like, why would you, and if I got a power chair, then I'd lose the use of my arms because I'm not using them. Like, what? But of course, I never say that. I am always just friendly because I understand the intention, right? But it's also up to us as community members to realize sometimes the impact that we may or may not be having on people. And so if you make a comment to somebody and you can kind of see them cringe or frown or turn away, I mean, you might want to ask, did I offend you? Because I didn't mean to. Like, how could I have said that differently? I think we need to be a little more curious sometimes. But again, it goes both ways, right? Intention and impact. And we have to look at both sides of that when we're considering people's dignity.
Yeah. And the last one is risk. And there is dignity in taking risk. There is this assumption that we have to protect our children with disabilities. And yes, of course we do. We have to protect all our kids. But we have to let them take risks. They have to learn critical thinking skills. They have to learn what their own limitations are and grow just like everyone else. And Roxanne and I were lucky because we had parents that did let us take risk or didn't know you were taking risk. But we were lucky in the fact that our parents did let us. And for me, for example, everyone when I was a kid had some kind of sport, either swimming, soccer, hockey, whatever it was. And I couldn't do those sports, but my sport was horseback riding. I started when I was 11 years old, and I was a teeny tiny thing at 11. And my dad always drove me to my lessons because my mom couldn't handle seeing me on a huge horse. She came a handful of times, but she really couldn't handle it. And especially after I fell off a couple times really good and hurt myself really badly, actually, a couple times. But she never said, Michelle, you cannot horseback ride, because she knew in the long run, it not only helped me physically, but it helped me to develop those critical thinking skills and learn my own limitations, all that we need as an adult. And it was no different than my other two sisters. They got to take risks too. And my younger one took a lot of risks, but yeah. So there's dignity in letting children take a risk. And Roxanne has another story to add to this.
Yeah, I mean, I was teaching wheelchair skills at the Glen Rose Rehabilitation Hospital for kids 12 and under 1 year. And there was a pretty big group of them, but there was one little boy who was about 8 years old, and I could see that he had good wheelchair skills, and he would have, and so I went up to him and I said, hey, we got to teach you how to do wheelies. And he started to cry. And I was like, I don't understand. Little boys follow me around stores. They love my wheels. How can he not want to do wheelies? But it turned out that mom had said, no, that was too dangerous. And that's why he was crying, is because he wanted to, but mom said that no. So I just feel very fortunate that mom was there and his older brother was there, and we all got to stand in a circle and have a discussion about how this is a critical skill. If you think he's going to be, going to be independent, he needs to know how to do a wheelie. And so it was a lovely discussion, and mom compromised and said she would allow him to try, but big brother had to be standing behind him to catch him if he fell. And so I thought, okay, this is a win. I don't want to talk to her about the fact that he kind of needs to know how to fall too. That can be for another day. But he'll practice wheelies. So yeah, but that just, I get it. As an older adult now, how we want to protect young people, and yet they need those opportunities to fall down and pick themselves back up. And if we do it for them, we're not helping. So same goes for, in all, what, disabled or not, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So we think this is just an important thing to go over, the types of disability based on a psychosocial perspective. And what that means is the way people see the world. And so these three categories of people with disabilities see the world very differently from each other. And so this is part of the reason why sometimes it's really hard to get the disability community to come together. And so the first one being developmental. The first misconception, mischaracterization is that is people with lower IQ levels. That is not true. Developmental disabilities is anybody who grew up with their disability, period, because we are all treated the same. So intellectual disability or not, we all get treated the same. Just that people like Michelle and I learn, we have better social skills. So we sort of learn to navigate our way out of that situation where people don't treat you well. But our peers with intellectual disabilities often do not. And they get picked on and abused. And in my opinion, if we would stand together as a group, we could help each other. And instead, our government policies divide us, right? They say, oh, PDD is here. And quite frankly, those of us that we're nowhere, like we don't fit in the equation anywhere. It's like, oh, you're good. You don't have an intellectual disability. You can do anything you want. Well, that is not true. and so, yeah, so people with developmental disabilities are institutionalized. So they are raised within a context that there's people that know their bodies better than they do. And so I find that in our community, we tend to seek out permission more than we should. We look to authority figures to tell us what we can or can't do. When we're adults, we can make the same decisions that everyone else makes. And so that's a very, very hard transition from childhood to adulthood with a developmental disability. We don't have access to the same sort of insurance mechanisms that other populations have. And our self-esteem is developed around our disability, which gives us a different way of looking at the world. Whereas people who acquire their disabilities later in life often can be very motivated to get back to what they once had. So they can be way more assertive than people with developmental disabilities who have conditioned to believe this is the way it is. Where people who acquire their, say a car accident, they may be solely focused on walking again, and they will do absolutely everything imaginable, including going to other countries and, to do whatever they can to get back. And good for them. Like, I think you should use every resource available to you to be the best person you can be in the world. But people who acquire disabilities tend to be more assertive. They tend to have access to insurance, either workplace or, but there just seems to be more insurance options available to them. And I'm forgetting one thing. anyways, I'll come back to it if I think of it. But and then the last one is seniors, and I have two parents. My dad is blind, and he still would not consider himself to have a disability. I'm convinced it's a seniors thing. It's like, God, I have to take on the label of senior, and now you want to add disability to that? I don't think so. And so I completely respect that the seniors don't like to identify as having a disability. I don't blame them, but 76% of seniors have one or more disabilities. So we really need to think about them when we're planning for any sort of disability related supports. And in fact, again, in trying to improve the rights of people with disabilities, this would be a great population to help us out, because there's way more seniors than any others. But yeah, it's tricky. And again, I think seniors have worked hard to be where they're at, and they can be called whatever they want to be called. So I hope that helps, just gives you some perspective on why we don't like, because for years and years, the one organization I work with would always try and pair us with the Spinal Cord Injury Association, because we have maybe similar challenges, but we don't mix, because my peers are people with developmental disabilities, and people with spinal cord injuries have acquired their disabilities later. And so we have very, very different perspectives in the world. And so it's not easy. It's not impossible, but it's not just a clear fit that we would, want to work together. So it's something to really think about when you're trying to get people with disabilities together.
Yeah. So just some tips for all disabilities here. The first one is relax and be yourself. We're all just human. We all grew up with families like everybody else. And if you just relax, and like we talked about earlier, ask, can I help you? I mean, that would make a world of difference. And whoever you're asking will explain to you if they need help or if they don't.
The next one is treat each person as an individual. Ask them that what would make them most comfortable, be respectful and considerate. So these are really just common sense tips.
And the next one is a little repetitive, but that doesn't hurt. Don't assume that you know what somebody needs. And what I say here is, just because you know one person with a certain type of disability does not mean you'll know the next person with the same type of disability. We're all individuals. We all have different needs and different ways that we need help. So again, you ask.
Yeah, and the next one is walk normally when helping someone with a disability. And mostly we're thinking about, say, individuals who are blind, right? That you just walk normally. You allow them to tell you to slow down, speed up. Do whatever. Again, it's all about not making assumptions. Allow the person with the disability to direct you.
And also this one could be for people with mobility issues, such as myself. I had a dad's driver just grab my arm and try and help me, and my arm's way up here and I'm trying to walk and he's like pulling me. So you just ask if and how they need help. And the next one, don't touch or move any equipment that is used by a person with the disability without their consent. Because when we are using our scooters, wheelchairs, walkers, canes, etc., when we're using our equipment, that's part of our body. So we really don't want people coming up and taking part of our body and shoving it in the closet or around the corner where we can't see it. So you always ask that person, can I move your cane? Can I scoot your wheelchair just out of the aisle a little bit? Or so you ask. And not only is it part of our bodies, but our equipment can be quite expensive. So if it gets damaged or ruined, we may not be able to afford to replace it. Yeah.
And the next one, be confident, calm, and reassuring. Even if the person exhibits unusual behavior, focus on how you can help. And so I have this lovely friend with Down syndrome, and I met him in an integrated dance in the integrated dance community here in Edmonton, like, oh my goodness, 10 years ago. And he can be quite the character. And there are times where he will just start speaking gibberish for no reason. And I don't quite know what to do, but I, being who I am, I usually just call him on it. I'm like, why are we speaking a different language? Are you aware I can't understand you? And I just try and kind of keep it lighthearted and you know, trying to see if there's anything wrong. But I've learned over the years that there's nothing wrong. I don't know why he does that. I can't figure out the pattern. But if I just stay calm and keep doing what I'm doing, he stops and goes back to doing what he was doing. So it was really no big deal. But if I had made it a big deal, like really pushed him, it could be a whole different situation where I just was calm, let him do what he needed to do, and we moved on.
And patience, optimism, and willingness to find a way to communicate are your best tools. And Roxanne's example fits this one as well perfectly. Yeah.
I do want to make one comment, is I have a lot of friends that communication often takes them a minute, and we tend to want to rush forward. And I find with certain friends, I just have to wait a minute and let them form that thought and get it out. And usually there's a brain injury involved. So there's just like an extra processing minute. And, you know, we can be very impatient here in this very busy world we're living in. So it's just that patience is really important. And invisible disabilities. So people with visible disabilities are often thought to be less able than they actually are, whereas people with invisible disabilities are often thought to be more able than they actually are. And so it ends up coming down to disclosure. You know, when you have an invisible disability, when do you tell somebody? Do you have to? Could you just never tell them? You know, but I mean, in a job situation is where it really gets hard to know, right? Do you tell them in the resume? Maybe you wait till you get to the interview, right? Well, the interview went really well. I think they might offer me the job. I don't think I'm going to tell them, you know, and so then you get the job. Well, do you tell them then when you're signing your letter of employment? Or maybe you wait until after the probationary period and then you tell them. It's not easy. And I really, what we are trying to say, especially to employers, is don't judge. Like if you had to do this, it would be a very, very difficult decision as to when, and do you? Like if your disability really has no effect on your job performance, maybe you never do. I met a woman here who was a nurse, an LPN, who admitted to me after we'd known each other for a couple of years that she had dyslexia, and she had kind of faked her way through some of the exams because she loved the work she was doing. And she was one of the best nurses I ever had. But interesting, right? How nobody knew that she worked with, that she had dyslexia. And I just thought that is phenomenal, you know. And so when people are motivated, they find ways, and we should be learning from them, not judging them. Okay. So recognizing and averting ableism. So we are coming to the end. Hopefully we're not boring you guys, but this is one of the last big slides I think we have. So yeah. These are tips on how to sort of avert ableism. And so the first one is you can't versus how can. And this is a story I got from a young woman with a disability of at least a decade ago. But she's very much like me, independent wheelchair user, and decided that she thought it would be fun to work at the Sears clothing department. And I kind of thought, I don't think that would be fun for me. But okay, right? So she went off and she got an interview, and the manager came to, you know, as the manager is coming towards her to interview her, she's thinking to herself, uh-oh, this is not going to go well, because she's already got a frown on her face. And she would say to my friend, well, you can't reach those clothes. And my friend would say, well, sure I can. Where's that stick that everyone else uses? I can do that. Well, you can't reach the till. And my friend would say, well, sure I can. I just need a stool. If you put a stool there, I can transfer on up, no problem. Right? The whole interview went like this. You can't. Well, what? Like all the manager needed to do was ask, how would you do this? And look at that, it just changes the entire flavor of the interview by just being curious. And that is our suggestion, is be curious, not critical, right? That it's okay as an employer to kind of want to know how your employees might accomplish a task if you know they're going to have to do it differently, but it's not okay to accuse them. And I find it funny because if people tell me I can't, oh, I'm going to really go about proving to you how I can. And I think that's why my friend felt too, is, oh, this is a challenge, but I don't think she ended up getting the job. Oh.
And the second one is believe people when they disclose a disability. Like Roxanne explained in the last slide, disclosing a disability, especially an invisible one, can be difficult. So when a person does disclose, just believe them. Just believe them. Take them at face value.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And why not?
Yeah.
That would be my question, but yeah. And the next one, listen to people when they request an accommodation. So an accommodation is an adjustment, just a slight adjustment to maybe a physical environment or maybe a procedure, and yeah, I mean, 80% of accommodations don't cost anything, right? And so that little adjustment can mean that this employee or whatever, it doesn't have to be employee, but will perform at a much higher level. So why wouldn't you accommodate them?
Yeah.
And just to assert, accommodations are actually a human right. So as like an employer, you kind of have to pay attention. Yeah.
And the next one, not that I'm repeating myself. Yeah. Don't assume you know what someone needs. Like I said before, just ask what they need and how they need it, and they'll let you know, I'm sure.
And then the next one, don't speak on behalf of someone with a disability unless they explicitly ask you to. So Michelle and I experience this all the time. If we are going out with an able-bodied person, they always speak to the one that's standing. And I mean, we all have ways of countering that. Like, I'm just tend to be extra assertive. So if I'm going out to dinner with friends, I go to the front, I tell them how many seats we need. Like, I assert myself immediately. But other people have different ways. And yeah, Michelle has a great example though.
Yeah. Years ago, I was shopping with my sister and her husband, so my brother-in-law. And at the time, this is many years ago, I did not have my scooter yet. When I went to malls or someplace bigger, I used my standard wheelchair. And of course, I need someone to push me because I only have the use of one hand. So if I try and push myself, I go in circles and I don't get very far. So anyway, he was pushing me in the store, and I found a shirt I liked. So he pushed me up to the till, the cashier, to pay for it. And immediately the cashier started talking to my brother-in-law and telling him how to wash the jean shirt. And I looked and I said, "Excuse me, that is my shirt. I'll be wearing it. I'll be washing it. I do not even live with him. So tell me." And he's like, "Oh, okay." And then he looked and he started telling me how to wash my shirt. So he spoke to me, but it took him by surprise, actually, which kind of shocked me. But anyway.
And so next one is talk about disability with everybody. And so what we're trying to imply there is there still seems to be a very much an attitude of shame around disability, and it is nothing to be ashamed of, and we should not be treating it that way. And so we specifically mention children because this will often happen. You're in a mall, right? And some little kid, 4 or 5 years old, "Hey mom, why does that person have wheels?" And of course you hear them because they got no filters, and it's a lovely, and I mean, I think it's adorable. But what's really upsetting to us is when people shush their kids, "Shh, don't look, don't," and kind of, push them away. Where, if, for me, if I see it happen and I'm smiling at you and your kids, send them over, I'll tell them. And it will be very simple.
Yeah.
My legs don't work, right? It doesn't have to be a big explanation. You don't have to give them a medical diagnosis. You just say, hey, my legs don't work and this is how I get around. Children think that's cool and they leave it there, but when you shush them and make them think it's some big mystery, I mean, to me, that's when things get weird, where if we just treated it like it was a normal phenomenon, which it is, 22% of the population has disabilities, I think we could get rid of some of that shame that gets associated with disability. So,
Yeah. And the last point here is one of the most important things to push back against ableism is to make sure people with disabilities are at the table where decisions are being made, and not just one, 2 or 3 or 4 of us at the table. Then we don't get intimidated and we have backup. So just let us make sure we're at the table, and we have a saying in the disability community: nothing about us without us. Like, have us there. We're great problem solvers. I bet you we could solve half the problems going on with people with disabilities with no problem, but we don't get asked.
No, and a lot of the programs that we use were not designed for us. They were designed for seniors. Like, there's just so many areas where if we had input, we could save the government millions, because that's why we live our lives. We are the lowest income earners out of any group. And so we're highly adaptive. And so it's always amazes me that y'all should ask us more, because we have to do this in our everyday life every day. So we just kind of like to end on this slide that shows you, all the barriers. These aren't all of the barriers, so just some of them, but environmental, institutional, attitudinal, which is in the middle for a good reason, communication, transportation. These are not all the barriers, but what we're just trying to show you here is that these start to add up, and pretty soon we're sitting in front of a brick wall that we can't get around, over. And so we have many different areas that need to be worked on to remove some of the barriers that we are currently dealing with. And then we just like to end on a slide that says we see our lives as fabulous, because living with disability is not easy. We are not always happy. We have, like, there's a lot of stuff that goes on, but we are blessed to live in Canada in a lot of ways. I've had opportunities here that I would not have had anywhere else. I am a former Paralympian. I competed in the 1988 Paralympics in Seoul, South Korea, playing wheelchair basketball. And it was one of the most amazing experiences of my life, and I am grateful for that. I went to university and NAIT. There's lots of things that I had trouble working. So again, there's, more things that could be done. But Michelle and I both feel that we've had great opportunities here, and we do this work because we want everyone to have access to those opportunities. Yeah.
I guess it's my turn now.
Yeah.
Oh, well, unlike Roxanne, I'm not a Paralympian, but I'm an accomplished horseback rider. I only gave up horseback riding a couple of years ago, so I've spent many years doing it. And I mean, this job is a wonderful opportunity, and it has opened so many doors. And I mean, I've been married just over 20 years now, and I have 2 stepdaughters and now 3 wonderful grandkids. And yeah, just so many different opportunities have arose, and I try and take as many as I can, just to improve my life and the lives of the other people as well. Yeah.
And that's it. So we're happy to take any questions that you may have.
Should I stop sharing, or?
Oh, you might want to stop recording.
Yeah, but I have to stop sharing to do that.
Okay. Yeah, then we can see each other.
Yeah. And I'll stop